Room 37 podcast by Post Punk TV. Our guest today is none other than the great guitar player Mark, or also referred as MGT, from bands like The Mission, bands like Gary Numan, Peter Murphy, and of course his new band, Seven Dials, and that's what we're here to talk about. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Tony. How you doing? Nice to be here.
Great to be here with you today. Well, let's start. Tell us everything about your new project.
Yeah, Seven Dials. It's a new band that I kind of formed with Chris Connolly, the vocalist, best known for his work with Revolting Cocks, Ministry, Finnish Tribe, etc. And drummer, Big Paul Ferguson, iconic drummer from the band Killing Joke. He was a founder member of Killing Joke and one of my favorite drummers, definitely. So I've been working with those two guys over the last several years, and we've come up with this project, Seven Dials. It's an album. We just released it on Creation Youth Records, which is the label created by Alan McGee of Creation Records and Youth, the bassist from Killing Joke, hence the connection. And yeah, we put this out on a snazzy metallic silver vinyl and CD, and of course it's available on digital and streaming. So it's out there for everybody to check out. 10-track album. Hope you enjoy it.
Please tell us how the band came about, because I know that you have this would be considered like a super band, super group with so many important musicians. So yeah.
Yeah, we don't really think ourselves as a super group. We're all friends. I've been collaborating with Paul Ferguson for the last 10 years. I ended up working on some of Paul's solo records. You know, he would come up with these demos with beats and spoken word vocals and basic sort of bare bones stuff, and he would give them to me, and I'd flesh them out with bass guitar and electric guitars and synths and other stuff, and then mix. And we put out an album with Porl called Remote Viewing in I think it was 2018. And around that same time, I was also collaborating with Primitive Race, like an industrial collective, various different industrial musicians, and I was involved, and Chris Connolly was involved. So I got to know Chris. We collaborated on a couple of tracks there. That led to us doing some stuff for Cleopatra Records, and then inevitably we started writing some original material, and it seemed very natural to invite Porl to come in and drum on the recordings, especially as Chris and Porl had been together in Murder Inc., 20 years before, maybe even longer.
Great. And how was the writing process? You had mentioned to me earlier that it was maybe you started during the pandemic, and
just before the pandemic, I sort of sent some demos to Chris Connolly. Chris is in Chicago, I was in Los Angeles. We're all British. Paul's in the East Coast, sort of Baltimore area. I'd sent Chris some demos, with some like program beats on it, song arrangements, and no vocals, no lyrics, and was like, hey, do you have any inspiration to come up with vocals on these? And he came back with these fantastic vocals. One of them was Wolves, one of them was Whispering Wand, and one of them was Knife Without Asking. And it just sounded really intense and massive. And we both were like, yeah, we should get Porl to drum on these. And so Porl like redid the drums, and then I mixed them, and everything was going pretty smoothly. And then the pandemic hit, everything ground to a halt in 2020. And a few years went by where none of us really were working on it. We were just off doing other things. No touring or anything. Everything ground to a halt. Eventually, I returned to the recordings last year and was like, oh wow, these sound great, I could hear them with fresh ears. And I said to Chris, hey, let's put this out as an EP, you know, like wrap them up, maybe add one more song, put it out as an EP. And Chris was like, oh no, I'd rather do a full album. So we soldiered on. I had to write some more demos, and then came the idea of adding some cover songs, because a cover song, it's not only fun to work on cover tunes, but it's a quick way to add content to your album, you know. So I had an inspiration to cover a Sparks song called Number One Song in Heaven for a while. So I suggested that one. I kind of came up with like a high energy, electrified, heavier interpretation of the music, and gave it to Chris and said, you know, can you bring some of your fire to this song? And he nailed it. And then the animation cover, Obsession, I'd recently created a remix of that for my wife, Ashley, who's does a lot of DJ work on the darkwave scene here in Los Angeles. And I'd said to her, oh, you know, we should have like let's have a nice, cool sort of heavy industrial tinged new version of the animation song. So I kind of remixed that and extended it and changed the arrangement. I'd added guitars to it, new beats. I think the only thing that was really surviving on the original was the vocal and you know, maybe some of the synth parts. And so I was like, hey, you know, if we need another cover song for the Seven Dials album, I should just strip the original vocal off that remix I did, strip away the original synths. It already had all new beats on it, new bass lines, new guitars, and everything. And I just kind of fleshed it out with all new instrumentation, and then gave it to Chris and said, you know, try throwing a vocal down on this, and I'm going to get Ashley to sing the female parts. It just seemed very organic and natural at the time.
Well, that is a great song. I listened to it, and of course, the original, and then I listened to you guys' version, and Ashley did a tremendous job singing her part, and the mix was great. The drummers were heavy, and there was like what I like, you know, the heavier sense of the music of a remake, right? So congratulations. I love the song, and I know that it's going to be a hit.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun doing it. We just had a lot of fun making this whole album, and that included the cover songs. Both of them, you can tell we're having fun with both of them. They're kind of tongue in cheek, you know. They're not like, you know, you don't think of Obsession Animation as something an industrial band would do or a metal band would do. And the same with the Sparks cover. But we've kind of brought our own vibes into those two songs, and we've kind of dragged them into kind of a metal industrial area. But we're still having fun with it. And the whole album, I think we were having fun with this whole record, and it kind of shows on the finished product.
Yes. So the plans for this band, it's going to be a touring band. You're going to be touring.
Yeah, we're hoping to have some shows later this year. We've got some individual touring commitments that we have to fulfill. I've got some Peter Murphy shows next month, and into the summer in Europe with Peter Murphy, and Paul Ferguson's got some shows with his other band, Light of Eternity. They're going to be opening for Ministry in Europe in a couple of months. So we're going to get all that out of the way, and we're looking at doing some Seven Dial shows, hopefully later in the year.
That it's great. Any LA shows or anything that you can give us a hint of?
I can't. There's nothing I can divulge yet, but you know, we're working on it.
Great, thank you. You have played with so many bands, so many interesting people and musicians. Can I ask you some questions? Let's start with like Peter Murphy, right? You've been a long time guitar player of his. What are some of the things that you can tell us about the way he wants you to play the songs? Is there a specific indication from him?
I mean, when I think about it now, I joined his band in 2005. He needed a guitarist for a US tour to promote his Unshattered album, which came out that year. And I don't remember receiving much direction from Peter at all. I just was sent a copy of the album, and I guess he just trusted me to, bring, to nail the guitar parts and then bring some of myself, my own style into it, which is what I did. And it's pretty rare that Peter would actually go, "Oh no, Mark, maybe you're more like this," or "Oh, don't do that, or don't do this." Pretty rare. He made the occasional minor comment on, "Oh yeah, try a bit more of that or a bit less of this." But generally speaking, I guess the reason I've continued to be Peter Murphy's guitarist is, I guess I naturally, come up with the style that he's enjoying. I mean, I'm creating what the record sounds like, but I'm also bringing my own vibe to it, and I guess he likes it because he doesn't really give me that many notes and direction really. Including when we did Bauhaus material, I would try and kind of conjure as much of the Daniel Ash sound and vibe as I could, and it was pretty rare that he would have anything negative to say. So hopefully, I was doing the right thing.
What about playing the acoustic guitar with Peter Murphy?
I'm usually playing a 12-string acoustic when I am playing acoustic. Usually, mostly on the Bauhaus material that we do, like Three Shadows and several of the songs would be on an acoustic 12-string, and or be on an electric 12-string. So I take a couple of different 12 strings out on tour, and Peter also has a Gibson 12-string that he will play, and like on Marlene Dietrich's favorite poem, and then a 6-string acoustic which he would play sometimes, say on All We Ever Wanted. So we'd both be kind of bouncing between acoustics. Sometimes Peter would pick up an electric as well. We'd do dark entries and he'd grab an electric and start making lots of noise on it, which was great.
Great. What about your time with Gary Numan?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you want to know?
No, how exactly, like, if you got some direction. He got heavier over the years. He's to me, he's a genius. He's way ahead of his time. His music gets better and it doesn't age. And I just want to know, how it felt playing with him.
Great. I mean, I've been a fan of Gary's, since I was a teenager. I mean, Gary Numan was a big pop star when I was like 14, 15 years old. Like Our Friends Electric had gone to #1 in the UK, so he was like mainstream radio, on the TV, the whole bit, pop star. Obviously followed up with Cars a year later, and which was an iconic song. And I remember learning. I had a little Bontempi electric keyboard, one of those ones you plug in. It's like an organ. I had one of those when I was 14, and I remember I worked out how to play the keyboards, just the basic lines, on Our Friends Electric, and I wrote it down. I actually came across those notes 30, 40 years later, going through some stuff my mom found in the attic, and it's pretty cool. Because I worked it out like 36 years after I had, worked that out in my bedroom with Gary Numan being a big pop star. I was then on stage playing that same song with him on guitar in 2013 when we did the Splinter tour of the States, and definitely like a bucket list moment. Gary's just a iconic singer and frontman, and a real sort of trendsetter in electronic music, and couldn't be a nicer guy as well. He's just a really nice guy. Him and his wife Gemma were very welcoming to me. I got to know Gary in the 90s when I was in the Mission UK, and Gary and Gemma would come along to shows and hang out backstage, and we forged a friendship way back then. So I've known Gary for 30, 35 years now.
Amazing. Talking about you brought up the Mission UK. We have a friend in common, Richard Vernon.
Correct.
So Can you tell us a little bit about playing with Wayne and Richard, and how a little bit of stories if you have, or any
Yeah,
memories?
I was in the Mission UK. We're called the Mission everywhere else. In America, they're called the Mission UK, and so I was in the Mission on and off over quite a protracted period of time. 15, 20 years. First joined them in 1992, and on one of the later lineups, when I rejoined the band after a 3-year absence, I rejoined in 2005. Rich was on bass, Rich Vernon, along with Steve Spring on drums, and they were a great rhythm section, and I really enjoyed playing with them both. And Rich and I became good buddies on the road. We'd end up rooming together and going out, sightseeing together. We definitely hit it off, and that kind of followed through a few. I don't know, 10 years later, I was touring with Ricky Warwick, the guitarist, singer of Black Star Riders and The Almighty, and he's also was the singer for Thin Lizzy. I'd been playing guitar for his solo band and played on his album at the time and stuff. And he needed a bass player for a British tour, so I suggested Rich, and ended up being a great fit.
Absolutely, yeah. Rich talks wonders about you and tells me that you're amazing musician, and yeah, I saw your videos and how you play, and it's amazing.
Yeah,
Uh,
I had Rich playing because I did a couple of solo records, and which I put out as MGT, just my initials. And
mhm.
um, when it came to touring that band, Rich was my first choice as the bassist. So yeah, I had Rich on bass for my MGT live band, Ashton Knight on vocals, who's from South Africa, and we had in Europe we had Bell Starr, who sadly has passed now, on drums, and then. We ended up doing a US tour with a different drummer as well, and yeah, it was always a pleasure to work with Rich.
Yes, he's a great friend, and yeah, unfortunately, he couldn't. I do this podcast, Post Punk TV with Rich, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, with the time change today, it was just difficult. So,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he told me that he has spoken to you. Uh, uh, you go back and forward between LA and the UK. Being obviously a professional musician, and you have so many commitments. How can you fit all these projects in your schedule? I mean, you must be, you must have somebody helping you,
I've
or
got
you're really good at it.
I've got like a robot double, like a doppelganger, and I send him off to like do like some of it, and then I'll do the rest of it, and you know, it's tough, but somebody's got to do it. Yeah, I guess I managed to juggle it all somehow. I've also been touring more recently with British band The Wonder Stuff, who are big over in the UK. We keep doing these sold out tours over there, and so yeah, every few months I find myself back in the UK doing a tour with those guys, and that's a lot of fun as well. I've also been working with Barney and Johnny from Napalm Death. We've been working on a new side project with our good friend Simon Effamy, and Absolute Power. And I've been recording some lead guitars on that stuff, which is kind of like it's gonna it's gonna kind of raise a few eyebrows. It's kind of like classic, I would say, retro 80s heavy metal. It owes a debt to like bands like Priest and Dio, and some of those classic 80s like new wave of British heavy metal bands, Maiden and bands like that. So I've been having some fun recording guitars on that stuff as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Great to know, because on Earache, the record label, I uh, I have friends that have a company here in LA called Kit. I don't know if you ever saw those things that I do. And now they're gonna release like Morbid Angel, Terrorizer, Napalm Death. all these bands that were signed to Earache, and they're gonna release it in that kit, which is like a little thing that you attach to your phone, and
Right.
it's like it's digital, but it's all you have something to keep physical with you always, right? So, yeah. But yeah, Godflesh also is one of my favorite bands. All that related to Napalm. That, but
Yeah, I
that's
love
great that
God.
you're doing that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's funny how I keep sort of get involved. I mean, because people were surprised that I did Tricky, back in the 90s. And that was just, I was asked if I wanted to audition for his band. They were looking for a guitarist. And, Tricky's trip hop comes out of the same camp as Massive Attack and Portishead, and not really known for heavy metal. But I went along and auditioned, and it turned out that Scott Ian from Anthrax had actually recorded a bunch of guitars on Tricky's new album at that time. Was an album called Angels with Dirty Faces, and he'd been doing it in New York City because he was living there. And Scott Ian also lives in New York City, I'm guessing, at that time. And so Scott ended up on half the album. So they wanted a guitarist that could do the sort of the Scott Ian Anthraxy metal-y guitars, but they also wanted somebody that could bring the different textures to it as well. And I got auditioned and got the gig, and that kind of raised a few eyebrows. And so I kind of feel like I'm going in the other direction now, doing like a Napalm Death Associated thing, because they're known to be like, thrash and hardcore and death metal and stuff. So it's fun to kind of stretch myself in these different directions.
Great, yes. Uh, and that's why you're such a good guitar player, because you can switch it like that, play heavy metal or play goth rock, or play a 12-string acoustic guitar with Peter Murphy. So you're yeah, that's amazing. Um, Okay, so we're here almost the end, and I usually have a couple of questions. And Richard, I'm going to ask you a question that Richard usually asks at the very end. But my questions are always, I have this post-punk TV, and we play music, all kinds of music. It's not just post-punk. Um, so I'm going to ask you like 4 or 5 bands, and I just want to know your opinion. Let's start out with the Smiths.
Yeah, I love Johnny Marr. Great, yeah, really great guitar player. Very inventive. A lot flashier and technical than you perhaps would even realize, unless you start to try and figure out some of those Smith songs. So I got a lot of time for Johnny Marr. He's an amazing guitar player. I was never a huge fan of Morrissey as a singer. I found him somewhat affected, but you can't argue with how he's a great frontman, great charisma, and those Smith songs are just iconic. And I must admit, I've liked some of Morrissey's solo albums as well. He kind of brought a bit of a glam rock flavor to some of the earlier ones, and I appreciated that. I know he was a fan of the New York Dolls, but yeah, the Smiths, great bands. In particular, Johnny Marr, I love the guitars.
That is my next question, actually. You read my mind. The New York Dolls and Johnny Thunders specifically as a guitar player.
Yeah, another legend, sadly taken from us. New York Dolls, really, you could argue those guys along with the Ramones, but I think the New York Dolls technically predate the Ramones a little bit, maybe a couple of years. So yeah, like New York Dolls and Iggy Stooges kind of really, to me, invented punk rock. Most British people would be horrified to hear that coming from a British person, but a lot of the bands like the Pistols, Steve Jones, Clash, they were all influenced by New York Dolls and influenced by Iggy and the Stooges. So that for me is like the real origin of punk rock. And I got big into punk rock when I was a teenager. Grew up in the late 70s, listening to a lot of Pistols and Clash and Generation X and Ruts, Buzzcocks, all of those bands, Skids. I was into all of those bands. So I was kind of into punk and metal at the same time. I was kind of soaking it all up like a sponge. So I was listening to all of those punk bands and new wave bands like Susie and obviously the bands that came later like Bauhaus and Joy Division. But I was also listening to Motorhead, and I was listening to a lot of new wave of British heavy metal, because to me, anything with a noisy guitar in it was cool in my book, and I didn't really have any blinkers on. For me, it was all encompassing. It was just all exciting, and it all sounded great when you turned it up on the stereo.
Would you think that could Motorhead be the best three-piece uh three-piece band, three members?
Well, there's a lot of great three-piece bands, from Cream to Rush. I was a huge Rush fan as well as a teenager. As a budding guitar player, I quickly figured out how cool Alex Lifeson was, and I worked out a lot of Rush when I was a 15-year-old boy. And so Rush are definitely up there. But yeah, Motorhead, just wall of sound. Loudest band I ever heard live. Saw them live a few times, and there's nobody that was ever any louder than Motorhead. Definitely up there as one of the greats.
Yeah. Well, as far as like heavy music, of course there's other three-piece, but like heavy, I think Motorhead is up there at the.
Yeah, you don't get that many three-piece metal bands, really, do you? Usually they've got like two guitarists. So yeah, I guess when you look at it like that, there isn't that many three-piece metal bands. So yeah, they're one of the best, definitely.
And the Police.
Love the Police, yeah. I was also very heavily influenced by Andy Summers as well. So I was already influenced by Motorhead and by Rush, but also by the Pistols and also by the Police. I just thought they were all great. As a guitar player, I thought Andy Summers' approach to guitar was fantastic.
Yeah.
The thing with the Police is they were all, aside from the fact that Sting obviously has a great ability to write really catchy and really great songs, you had just three amazing players. Stuart Copeland is the drummer's drummer, and Sting is such an accomplished bassist and singer, and he wrote a lot of that stuff on guitar, and then just got Andy Summers to play it, like Message in a Bottle, and that was all Sting's riff, and then Andy Summers just a fantastic guitarist who was already, a seasoned session guy in his own right before the Police were formed. So yeah, the Police were amazing, really good band.
Yeah, Andy Summers really brought out like a lot of pedals that people were not using. A lot of people wanted to sound like him, and he dialed in that sound. Definitely it was his. Lastly, well, you mentioned the Sex Pistols, but I'm gonna go more into the dark side here. Siouxsie and the Banshees. Who do you think? With Siouxsie, who do you think was the best guitar player? I mean, it's an easy question, but obviously, what do you think of the guitar playing with Siouxsie?
I think I'd have to probably go with John McGeoch, because I just loved his work with Magazine, and obviously Siouxsie like Spellbound and all of that era was astonishing. And I liked his work with the Armory Show and with Public Image Limited. So I feel like John McGeoch has continued to prove himself as the guitarist on every project that he was involved in, and sadly he was taken from us too soon. But yeah, I think John McGeoch was fantastic, but also I've forgotten his name. The guitarist on the first Siouxsie recordings was also great. John Kay or something like that, McKay. He was a really good guitar, really kind of seminal as well,
Yeah, he had definitely had a sound as well, and Robert Smith did a good job covering because they were not easy parts to cover, and I think that he just came in and did what he had to do.
Yeah, Robert Smith himself. And Robert Smith is, I would argue, is a underappreciated guitarist. Obviously, being the front man and the strong image that he has, sometimes you forget how iconic his guitar parts have been. On the
I was lucky. I was lucky to walk on. I was invited on stage at one of the shows, and he has so many pedals. He has a section of pedals just for a forest, just for that song. He has four pedals just for that song dialed in, and
I believe it. Yeah,
amazing.
I like Smith's guitar playing. I just love The Cure. Who doesn't really? That's a great band.
Yeah, The Cure. And I mean, lastly, who's your favorite, dark goth? I don't want to ask you Bauhaus because obviously your relation with Peter Murphy. Obviously, Bauhaus were revolutionary, and of course the goth band, right? But
Yeah.
any other bands that you can bring up? Just one or two that you can mention.
I mean, I was I'm not ashamed to mention that I was very influenced by, well, I was very influenced by Daniel Ash for sure from Bauhaus, and I was also very influenced by Billy Duffy, who was
Mm-hmm.
famous for his work with the Cults, obviously Southern Death Cult originally and Death Cult. So yeah, Billy's sound, yeah, when they came out with the Love album and She Sells Sanctuary and Rain and all that whole sound of that whole album, I just fell in love with it. And I remember going through a period where I really wanted to sound just like that. And it was kind of a bizarre coincidence because I ended up playing guitar on a tour for Theatre of Hate, the British band, and Billy Duffy used to be their lead guitarist before he was in the
Mm-hmm.
club. So I ended up doing a tour with Theatre of Eight in '91 in place of Billy Duffy. So that seemed kind of like a weird synchronicity thing.
Yeah, yeah, I have a video that I posted of him playing, and he had the same look, the blonde hair and everything.
Yeah,
And he's a great guy, and
yeah,
also he's another person that another guitar player that has a specific sound with the
yeah,
Vox and
yeah,
with the pedals, and yeah, he's a big pedal guy. And but his sound, it's like you, like yourself, like Billy, like Johnny Thunders. Uh, it's like you hear the first strum of the a note, and oh, I know the guitar player right off the bat, right? I know who that is.
right,
Like you mentioned, Susie and the Banshees. Uh, you know, the flanger. I mean,
yeah,
he had it up by the microphone up so that he didn't have to bend over and mess
yeah.
around with the pedal. But and I'm sorry that I go over this, but I'm a guitar player, so I love when Rich told me about you, and I was like, yeah, I need to ask him some guitar questions. So I do apologize. So finally, here before we go back to your latest album, and tell everybody where people can find it and everything. Um, what has been? It's a two-part question. What has been your best decision in life, and what has been your worst decision in life?
Ooh, interesting. I guess I guess my best decision in life, certainly as far as my music career was concerned, was I ended up moving from Birmingham, England, in the '80s. My mom and dad had divorced, and my father went to live in. Well, first he lived in Buffalo, New York. He was working there under a contract with a tire company, Pirelli Tires, and then Dunlop. And then he ended up marrying a Canadian and moving to Toronto. So I would visit him in Toronto, and he kind of talked me into considering living there. And I'd really enjoyed visiting it as a teenager. So in '85, I actually went to live in Toronto, Canada. So I was there for around 6 months or so, and got a job in a record store, and I joined a band, a Canadian band called National Velvet, and I was kind of rehearsing and recording with them, and I started to realize, oh wow, all these Canadian guys on my scene, they're just all listening to British bands. I realized there wasn't that many at that time in the '80s, aside from Skinny Puppy Say, there wasn't that many successful alternative dark wave bands happening coming out of Canada. So I ended up going back to the UK at that Christmas to visit my mom for Christmas, and I just never went back. And then I ended up, joining Spear of Destiny, and then doing Theatre of Hate, and then getting the gig with The Mission, and onwards from there, Tricky, Peter Murphy. And I realized none of that would have happened if I hadn't kind of moved back, to England from Canada. And so that was probably the best decision I made with regard to my music career without realizing it at the time. As for the worst decision I made, probably during the pandemic, I'd had a 1979 first year edition Gibson Les Paul Custom Silverburst, the model that Adam Jones from Tool made famous. And I'd owned it since like 2001. And it had been like living in its case for like the last 10 years prior to the pandemic. I'd kind of retired it from touring. And I'd only paid I think like £900 for it, British pounds, when I got it back in 2001. And I ended up selling it during the pandemic because I wasn't playing it, it was just living in its case. And because Adam Jones ended up doing a signature model, which was like a reproduction of the model that I owned, I sold it for like a lot of money. I think I got like $7,500 for it or something. So I couldn't say no to that, but I had to pay the rent and I had to pay bills. And, it was a tough time. Nobody could go on tour during the pandemic. So I feel like my worst decision was selling that 1979 Silverburst. It has to be said.
Yes. Yeah, I remember the pandemic, and I remember thinking, because I was a big collector of all kinds of instruments and amplifiers and I remember looking at all those guitars, and I was like, nobody's going to buy this. I mean, it made me realize that it's nice to have things, it's nice to have instruments and everything, but in a crisis, it's just a piece of wood. It's an instrument, right?
It's funny because the guitar had lived in its. I'd toured it a lot. I toured it with The Mission. I toured it with Peter Murphy. But then I eventually kind of was like, okay, that's enough wear and tear on that baby. And plus you go through phases with guitars, right, where you kind of get a bit bored of a guitar you've had a few years, and you start, fawning over a new model or a different model. And so I retired it to its case, and it lived in its case for 10 years. And yet I think I sold it like 4 years ago, and I'm still regretting it, like, even though it would just probably have been carrying on living in its case in my closet.
Great story.
What
Thank
can
you for sharing it. Yeah.
I've probably done something worse than that, but that's what springs to mind.
Yeah. Can you share your signature model from Schecter? I'm a big fan of this Les Paul type of.
Yeah, so I got an endorsement with Schecter. So this is my Mark Thwaite's signature Solo 2. Solo 2 is the name of the shape. Obviously, it's paying homage to the Les Paul. So this is like a real like Les Paul custom killer, I would say. It's a very well made guitar, mahogany, maple cap. It's got my choice of Seymour Duncan pickups, Jeff Beck bridge, Alnico Pro 2 neck. They're both coil tapping. My choice of a Bigsby mirrored pick guard. It's a flip-flop paint job. You can see how it looks purple 1 minute and then blue the next minute. Mother of pearl inlays. Lovely stained sort of red back. Kind of hard to tell in this light, but it's just a thing of beauty, And they've been making and selling this signature model now since 2017, I think, and it's still going strong. Comes complete with my signature embossed on the back, which is neat. So it's a beautiful guitar.
Very beautiful guitar. Very beautiful.
Sounds great. It doesn't make me. I've always been a Les Paul guy, and it doesn't make me miss my Les Pauls at all. It just feels and sounds incredible.
Les Pauls are known for like snapping necks as soon as you drop it on the ground.
I've had a few.
Have you ever dropped one of these?
Yeah. I've had. I remember going to Mission rehearsals in the UK for a tour in 1996. First day rehearsal, walked in, fired up the amp, got my sound together, pedal board, put the guitar. It was like a carpeted rehearsal room. Put my guitar on the guitar stand. It was one of those guitar stands where it just leans back. And as I walked off, I guess the guitar stand was like unstable on the it's like a thick carpeted floor. and the guitar just went boop, fell on thick plush carpet. But it just that whole, because the guitars are like, you know, at an angle like that, you know, the headstock. It just took the headstock off, well, broke it apart. First day rehearsals, so I was like, God damn it. So I had to get it re-glued. Luckily, it was re-glued and as good as new. But, you know, it's like with guitars like that, once they've had some damage, even though a re-glued headstock really doesn't compromise its ability to work in any way, shape, or form, it does inevitably devalue the guitar for collectors. So it was always frustrating.
Yeah.
I also had 2 guitars, one of them being a Les Paul, the same one actually. I flew from London to New York for a tour, and when I got off the plane, I opened the guitar case because it had been checked. It was in like a hard shell Gibson case. Headstock was broken in the hard case, which means that they'd been just throwing it around really badly, and it had actually broken the headstock in the case, which is crazy. And that happened twice.
That
happened twice on 2 different guitars.
Wow. Very unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that.
It is, yeah.
Well, Mark,
it got repaired though.
Yeah. Anything that you want to plug? I don't want to say the word plug, but anything that you want to mention? Again, where can we find your website? Where can we buy your music?
Yeah, well, it's all on all the usual suspects. You know, you can get the 7 Dials album or the tracks. You can buy the vinyl. You can get the CD, or you can get it on digital MP3. Best thing to do. I mean, obviously you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Apple Music. But easiest thing to do is go to our website, the7dials.com. It's like one word. And that will have links to all of the ways you can buy the record. You can listen to it on Spotify if you want. All our videos are on there. We've got a new single out now, the Obsession single. So yeah, show your support and check it out.
Okay, for all the listeners and viewers out there, we will have on our links, we'll have the website and also all the other places where you can purchase Mark's latest project, 7 Dials. It has been a pleasure talking to him tonight, and you're welcome anytime. Hopefully